חודש טוב ומבורך, ברשות הרב סבן, ברשות כבוד הרבנים. Rabbi, just a quick word right before Tefilat Arvit. I saw a tremendous Hiddush. Parashat Noach will always fall out in Chodesh Cheshvan. Torah opens up this week's parasha. Ele toldot Noach, ish tzadik tamim, haya bedorotav. Et Elohim hitalech Noach. With God, did Noach walk. Now we all know, and if you don't know, I'm about to tell you, that God has many names. And different names of God manifest different types of character trait. Maybe even more than that. And depending which name you see in the Torah is the manifestation of this character of God. Now we know that God's name of mercy is Yud-Kei Vav-Kei Hazak Baruch, and the name of judgment is Elohim. So in the Torah when it says Et Elohim hitalech Noach, that with Elohim, with the name of judgment that Noach walk, the Torah is actually trying to point out something very significant. You see, Rabotai, that when everything is going well in somebody's life, when he's making good parnasah, and he's going on a few vacations, and he can afford his kids' camps and his tuition, he has a nice car, and the whole 9 yards, he has good shalom bayit, it's very easy to serve God. Why? Because everything is going well. Therefore, Yamidah is supposed to be a little bit longer, and you're supposed to have more kavanah and brachot, and you're supposed to put on tefillin, you're supposed to be a good Jew because God's being very good to you. However, it happens sometimes where a person's not experiencing Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. He's not experiencing God's name of mercy in the hefich. He's experiencing God's name of justice, which is Elohim. He's feeling the Elohim inside. And when it's difficult, when it's dafka Elohim, when parnasah is not going so well, and maybe he's not on talking terms with his wife, or maybe his kids are giving him a hard time, when life is Elohim, but still he decides, I'm still going to serve God b'cholofen. It doesn't make a difference which manifestation of God's name is he showing me. Is he showing me Yud-Kei Vav-Kei? Is he showing me Elohim? But I'm still going to serve God. Hashem says you receive tremendous bracha. And that's what the Torah is telling us over here. Et Elohim hitalech Noach. That even though right now Noach is experiencing an extreme manifestation of Elohim, it's very judgment-filled, the life of Noach. He's the only survivor, like Rabbi Saban, and he comes out of Tevan, there's nobody there. Imagine one day waking up and there's nobody around. It's extremely depressing. But still, Et Elohim hitalech Noach, he was still serving God, even though the manifestation of Elohim was there. And because of that, because he served God with Elohim, that's why he was zocheh to tremendous bracha. Even after the Mabul, he lived for another 350 years after the Mabul. Yet 70 generations that came out of Noach. All because of what? Et Elohim hitalech Noach. Because he served God when it was still the manifestation of Elohim, when it was difficult. Therefore, our rabbis tell us something very significant. When a person's having an easy time, it's no chidush to serve Hashem. But when daf gets difficult and you still do it, that's when you get the most bracha. Rabbi El-Karif in his Sefer Sas B'Imratecha, it's a famous book, it's unbelievable, Rabbi Goel El-Karif. He tells a story over there on this piece that he writes. And he says that one time, he was talking to not a Holocaust survivor, but a person that survived World War I. Oh, very, very old man. And he said that he lived in Russia back in the day. And the Russians, they were recruiting anybody that could breathe in order to fight the Germans. And the Russian army was extremely weak, very primitive, very, very chalash. They didn't even have weapons of this year. The weapons were very, very old weapons. And the German army, very sophisticated. They had tanks, and they had smart weapons, and they were very, very up to date. What the Russians' goal was not to fight the Germans in the very regular way of shooting. They didn't even have, most of them didn't even have guns, they had knives. They gave their soldiers knives and swords to fight the Germans. And this man tells a story that the plan of the Russians was to send 10,000 civilian soldiers. These guys that they just recruited didn't even teach them how to fight. They're just gonna walk into Germany. And they knew, this man said that the Russians, they did the calculation that around 7,000 of these men were going to die. But at least if they're gonna die, let them take some Germans along with them. And this man said the night before he was recruited to go on this suicide mission, he said to himself, this might be the last time I'm able to pray. right before the recruitment, this might be the last time I'm going to pray. So he stood in the corner to pray mincha. This agav, I saw this also Hidush. They say that Tefillat mincha is very important. The Gemara says, be very careful to pray Tefillat mincha. And the Arizal explains why. He said, because the very first prayer that was ever prayed in history was mincha time. Because Adam Rishon, he sinned with the Eitz Hadat right before Shabbat started. And then he said to himself, after he sinned, oh my gosh, I have to pray. I have to say something. So the very first prayer he prayed was right before Shabbat came in, was just Tefillat Mincha. So therefore he says that since Mincha was the first Tefillah ever prayed, it has a tremendous koach. And that's why the Gemara says, be very careful with Tefillat Mincha. See, that's why the Yetzirah, the biggest Tefillah is the biggest Yetzirah. Always in the middle of work, or always in the middle of something. There's always a client, there's always a customer, there's always something. But be very careful with Mincha, because Mincha was the first prayer ever prayed, and because of that, it has a tremendous koach to get answered. Anyway, this guy gets up, he's like, I have to pray Mincha. He goes to the corner, he starts to pray. And right at the time that he's praying his luck, the Mefaked walks in, the captain walks in. And all the soldiers, they stand up straight, and this Jew over there, this little Jew boy is praying Mincha in the corner. And the general gets frustrated because everyone's standing and everyone's answering him, but this Jew is standing there and he's not answering anything. And he doesn't even think twice. Two guys, they grab him and they throw him into prison. Now, Russia, back in the day, if you're thrown into prison for unsubordination, there's no justice, there's no court system, there's no lawyer, there's only mishpat mavet. That's what you get. You get right away, it's gezat din. The guy's going to die. So he goes in front of the judge, and the judge asks him his name, and this guy the whole time is not even answering. He's just saying Tehillim under his lips because he doesn't know what to do. This is a true story. The Rabbi Goel Karev said the guy told me the story with his own lips, and all he's doing is just mumbling a prayer as the judge is asking him questions. What is your rank? What is your name? And how dare you be insubordinate to your general? And then all of a sudden, he looks at this man is mumbling, he's not answering. He says, this guy is Mishuga. This guy is crazy. And if a guy is crazy, there's no point of putting him to death because he's already crazy. They put him inside some sort of psych unit in one of the hospitals, and they left him there. And after a few months, the psychiatrist noticed that he's normal, or maybe he was liberated, and they sent him off. And the guy said, as he's telling the story to his children and his grandchildren, he makes a comment and he says, I could have said, oh wow, zu Torah v'zu schara. This is what I get paid for. I went to pray mincha because of that. This is my reward. I get thrown in front of the judge. I'm about to die. But he didn't say that. He tells his grandchildren. Because the opposite. Even though I felt in my life Elokim, I felt in my life a tremendous amount of judgment, but I still went ahead and I still did the right thing. Because of that, God granted me a very long life. Most of my friends, he said, charged the German army. They went with those knives and those swords that they gave us, and everybody died. Because by me, however, I ended up in a psych ward, but I'm still living today. Because that is the reward for Eta Elokim Italech Noach. That when a Jew, the Noachs of the generation, they still go with God, but they go with him specifically when it's Elokim. There's a tremendous bracha. Rabbi Saban, you mentioned the Holocaust. And as Rabbi Saban was talking, I remember the story that I read when I was in high school. And it was a book. And the book was called A Boy Named 68881. Can anybody repeat that? A Boy Named 68881. That was the boy's name. And obviously he was a Holocaust survivor. And those were the names on his arm, 68881. His name was Mr. Yisrael Stark. They called him Strulik. And Strulik tells the story that right before the liberation of the camps, it was January 1945. And the Germans, they knew that they were coming. They knew the Americans were coming. And they were nervous, and they said to themselves, we have to clean up shop. We have to do something. We have to destroy the evidence. So like Miskenim, this guy Strulik, he tells the story, were over 2,000 prisoners. The Germans, they made them march from somewhere in Europe all the way to the Austrian Alps. He said it was freezing. He said we had tattered clothing. Our shirts were like smartutim. They were like trapki. They were like garbage. And the Germans, they were sitting there in their boots and in their wool jackets. and their guns, and they made us march. And they said that if you fell out of line, the punishment for falling out of line was a bullet in the head. And says this truly character, and I saw my friends, he said. I saw them as they were walking, and one by one, in the freezing wind blasts of 70 miles per hour. And it was negative 10 degrees outside. And we are shivering, and we're marching on days on end, tells Sruli, and people are falling like flies. And all of a sudden he says, I wanted to give my brothers some chizuk, but what do you tell them? If you fall out of line, you die. And then all of a sudden he says, I had an idea. When I cannot help them physically, maybe I could raise the morale. And he said, I heard my brothers from behind me screaming, Ima, Mommy, help me. Rabbanu Shalom, help me. He says, I don't know what to do. But maybe I could sing a song, he says. And he starts singing the song of Ani Ma'amin. Ani Ma'amin, and he's singing it, and next thing you know, the song catches on, and the guy behind them is singing, the guy behind him is singing, until the entire platoon of European Jewish prisoners are singing this song. He said it was a miracle the Nazis allowed us to continue. But because of that song, after we began singing it, everybody survived, and we made it to our destination, January 1945. Then fast forward to May of that year, May 1945, and the bombs were going off, and the gunshots were flying, and the Nazis knew the Americans are closing in, so they decided to just run away, and my camp became liberated. He says that when the American soldiers came and they saw how skinny we were and how boned we were, they began making a soup, like a stew, of potatoes, whatever they could find. There was a long line, he says, of people waiting to get food. The soldiers were serving the soup in their own helmets because they had no other utensils. We all stood in line, he says. We're all waiting for food, and Srulik and his friends are talking, and as they're talking and they're salivating, spritzim, as my wife calls it, in the back of their throat, waiting to get food they haven't eaten in years, they see another line. And they're wondering to themselves, well, what is that line over there? So Srulik convinced his friends, let's go check out that line. And they said, but Srulik, wait, we're next, let's just get the food. He goes, I know, but I'm very interested in that line over there. So they go to that line over there, and they see that it wasn't food they were giving out, but it was the Rabbi from Chust, the Chusturuv, and they called it Rabbi Yeshua Greenwald. And he was giving out a pair of tefillin. But he didn't even have a tefillin shalosh. And the tefillin shel yad that he had was tattered. It was worn out. And all the prisoners could do was just hold it in their hands and make the bracha l'aniach tefillin. This boy, Srulik, he approached the rabbi. He took the tefillin in his hands. He made such a heartfelt bracha l'aniach tefillin after God knows how long. And tears streaming down his eyes. And his friends made the same bracha. Turns out that all the people that ate from the American food the soldiers gave them, they either got really sick or, Rahman Hassan, they died. And they were thinking to themselves, did the Americans poison our food? The answer, they didn't poison them. But the stomachs of the survivors were way too sensitive to have a meal right now. They had to be trained into eating again. And since the soldiers gave them a heavy meal right away, the stomachs couldn't take it. What a way to go. After so many months of surviving, just to die, not by the hands of the Nazis, but by the hands of the American soldiers just trying to help them. But when Srulik realized that this is why they were dying, but he was saved from that pair of tefillin that the Chustorav gave him. And again, this story that rings so true of Et Elohim hitalech Noach, that even though you're experiencing Elohim, you're experiencing Din, you're experiencing judgment, but you still hitalech, you still go and you're still loyal to God and His mitzvot and His commandments and His tradition. God says you receive tremendous bracha. The boy named the 68-881. Mr. Srulik Stark survived the Holocaust and built a tremendous family to tell the story over and over again. Now I understand, Rabotai, why this month is called Mar Cheshvan. Because people experience a lot of mar in their life. A lot of mar people experience, a lot of bitterness. And like I said in the beginning, Parashat Noach will always fall out in Cheshvan, because just like Noah was et Elohim, hitalech Noach dafka when it was Elohim. So to us, when we're experiencing the mar of Cheshvan, the mar Cheshvan, the bitterness of Cheshvan, Noach is trying to tell you, that's when God wants you the most. Not when it's easy. When it's easy, there is no chidush. But specifically when it's hard. When it's hard and you still do it, God says you receive tremendous bracha. And finally, and with this I end, I understand the Baal Turim parasha. Because the Baal Turim says that if you take the Sofei Tevot, the very last letters of Et HaElohim Hitalech Noach, backwards it spells Chacham. Hitalech Elohim Hitalech Noach, backwards is Chacham, Sofei Tevot. And I'm thinking to myself, what does the Baal Turim mean? Why is the Torah calling Noach a Chacham? And then I turn back to the Mishnah Pirkei Avot that says, Ezehu Chacham, who's considered a smart man? That he doesn't see the future, but he anticipates the future. That means that he could feel what's coming. Rabotai, there's a cloud. That any time that you see Elohim, you see judgment, you should know Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is not far behind. Therefore, when Noach, hitalech God, he was walking with God. He's Chacham. Why is he Chacham? Because he knew Elohim is just a chapter in my life. But at the end of the day, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei will prevail. And therefore, he's considered Chacham because he's Roret HaNolad. He sees or he anticipates the future. He anticipates Yud-Kei Vav-Kei coming back inside his life. So therefore, he says, that is a lesson with Chodesh Cheshvan, Mar Cheshvan and Noach. That even though indeed it is difficult and people experience plenty of Elohim in their lives. But when you fight through that Elohim, like Mr. Stark, Mr. Strulik, and this guy in the story of the Russian soldier who made himself like a crazy man, but he still served God. God says, even with the Elohim, Dafka and the Elohim, Dafka when it's Mar, that's when you become the greatest Chacham. Wishing everybody here, Chodesh Tov Mevorach.
חזק וברוך, רבותיי היקרים, we have